During this COVID, what the challenges which we've faced are overzealous junior officers who continue to refuse or deny us entry into the capital or into towns, into cities, even if we show them our press card. They constantly ignore that we are essential service providers. They choose to tell us turn back. We've had journalists who have been beaten up, who have been arrested over the COVID period. And we take it as a form of government threat on our media freedoms, because we have been talking to them and they've been promising to act differently, but they have not. So at the end of the day, we see that this could be deliberate, and it is deliberate. We are in the deep end of this pandemic. We cover it on a daily basis. We are part of the frontline workers, but no one considers that. A clear example will be when lockdown restrictions are announced. You rarely get, we always have to fight to be part of the essential services list, which will be announced on that particular day. Yet, we are the ones who are broadcasting it to everyone else. They will say doctors are essential service providers, police officers, the army, and then they forget journalists, yet they are the ones, they are facing the camera, while they are telling the world that, they're telling the country that.
Despite the fact that journalists have been declared an essential service, we're still seeing these kinds of arrests and harassment. And so I think that's where, as lawyers, maybe we need to also consider pursuing civil charges or civil remedy against those police officers, for instance, who are abusing those rights, even prosecutors who are are prosecuting journalists simply for exercising their rights. We need to pursue civil remedies against them, so that at an individual level, we say whatever your instruction is comes from the top. You have no right to actually implement an unlawful instruction, and you need to be held personally accountable for doing that and for violating people's rights.
The lockdown period saw some of the most or the worst human rights abuses, because they would arrest you. The Constitution allows people to support you or to protest or to come to court. They would use lockdown regulations to say you cannot move. So it was difficult for people to support each other. It was difficult even for journalists to go about their work. Some journalists were being stopped. They had to be taken to the police station only to be released after an outcry. It was difficult for people to protest against bad governance, because protests are underpinned by the Constitution, petitioning our government over issues that worry us. It's constitutional, but we were not able to do that because those rights were suspended using the COVID lockdown regulations.
I think the COVID-19 and the lockdowns that we've had in Zimbabwe have hugely affected content creators and citizen journalists. I think in the first lockdown, of course, we saw a lot of journalists actually being harassed by security forces. We've seen how many journalists and citizen journalists who are out there on the streets were arrested on trumped up charges last year.
Most times you hear that a journalist has been detained because he has a 2019 press card, when we all know that the 2020 press cards might not have been out by then. You also have issues of people being arrested for probably leaving work at 6, but they're essential service workers. Newspaper is always printed late in the night.
When I went to Epworth covering donation which was being done in Epworth by a certain organization, on our way back, I was badly assaulted at Epworth Chiremba Road block by soldiers. They dragged me out of the car and then started assaulting me with bare hands. And I said to them, I'm a journalist. And they said, we don't care. Who sent you here? Are you from Al Jazeera? I was like, no, I'm not from Al Jazeera. I'm just a journalist. I'm a freelance journalist. I was just praying that they will not leave me dead. I don't think I've been assaulted like what they did to me in my whole life. They discovered that I had a lapel microphone that I'd clipped on my jacket. So they were furious. They said, yeah, you're broadcasting whatever we are talking about here. So they damaged my microphone. I then realized that I had dropped my camera lens and went back to the block, and they said we do not see any camera lens here. And we proceeded to Airport Police, where we made a report. After 2 days, I was then called, and they said, we have found your lens. But there was no arrest that was made. No one was prosecuted. No one was brought to book to account for this. I think I was in bed for 3 days. And it was something else.
At times you have to censor yourself, ask yourself, is this really worth pursuing? So there are stories that at times that you, as a content creator, that you forego because you don't see, because you fear for your life. It's not every story that you pursue. So no wonder why at times people out there see us doing the most ordinary stories. Not because we can't do the extreme stories. We can, but experience has taught us that there are some boundaries that have been set by those by the powers be.
If you look at the Zimbabwean situation, you know, on the one hand we've got a so-called new dispensation, but which is practicing a lot of the same, the same tactics that the Mugabe regime used, and freedom of expression still isn't really permitted in Zimbabwe. And because so much of other forms of media in Zimbabwe have now been captured in different ways, be it radio, TV, or even a lot of mainstream newspapers, it's the online space that's the most free. That's where you've got the most freedom of expression, where you've got, young bloggers, you've got online platforms, you've got really, powerful political, satirical skits, and a lot of young people who express themselves on Twitter. And so I think this is where the government is seeing the most resistance, and that's a space that it wants to clamp down on. I mean, let's not forget last year the Zimbabwe Lives Matter was a hashtag that emerged on Twitter. It ended up focusing a lot of attention globally on the clampdown going on in Zimbabwe by the regime, and so they're definitely focused on trying to clamp down on that space, because it's the freest space for expression currently in Zim. You look at the recent examples of arrests of Hopewell Chingono, who's been arrested multiple times, and most recently arrested alongside Job Sikhala and Fadzai Mahere. And I think Hopewell is an example of a journalist, of a content creator who is using his journalism skills to expose corruption and speak truth to power. And he's done an amazing job of that. And because he's doing this job, he's being attacked and persecuted by the Mnangagwa regime. And currently, his most recent arrest for allegedly sharing this video of a policeman who had supposedly killed a baby. Is completely trumped up.
I'm not going to stop at all. I'm not going to stop doing my work, because as long as I'm doing things that are constitutional, as long as I'm doing things that are legal, there's no reason for me or any other journalist for that matter, or anyone in media, including comedians, to be worried. They will arrest you, they will take you to court, but those charges will not stick because they are built on lies. So it's important for people like myself as journalists to continue doing our work, because journalism is about holding the powerful to account for their actions. They use taxpayers' money. Right now we live in a country where the biggest hospital, Salim Gabi Hospital, has got only 2 maternity theaters. They were built in 1977. Only one of them is working. 2,500 pregnant women are dying every year in Zimbabwe. That's the equivalent of about 15 jumbo jets crashing and killing only pregnant Zimbabwean women. And that's a tragedy. In any other part of the world, that would be unacceptable. So if we don't expose corruption, because corruption is a direct consequence of mismanagement of public funds. And the situation that I've just explained at the biggest hospital in Zimbabwe is a direct consequence of the looting of public funds, of the plunder of the nation's national resources, of the misgovernance that is taking place in Zimbabwe.
Magistrate who had argument is said to be away,
Just a few months ago, we wouldn't have thought twice about doing an interview on the steps of the magistrate's court. That was something which was normal. Courts are meant to be open public places where such things can be conducted, and we're seeing this heightened repression. Things which used to be normal are now considered no-go areas.
So we are at Chikuru Maximum Prison, where we just witnessed the release of Joanna Mamombe and Celia Chimbiri, who were being charged with undermining the authority of the police. So I'm here, I was covering their release from remand.
We will continue to fight, we will continue to speak, and I know there are young people right now who will be listening to this interview, who actually have the same spirit that we have. So the struggle will not die, because there is always going to be a continuation.
These girls were allegedly abducted, and we felt that the government didn't want, at that time, didn't want this story to come out. They didn't want the girls to tell their story. So that's one of the reasons why I felt that I was arrested. That's one of the reasons why I feel journalists are being attacked, because government, there's some information that government doesn't want people to know.
Government doesn't want with any information. Whether they tell each other or it's just one character which has been shared amongst them, you don't easily get information from government. We really want to know how much has been invested in the fight against COVID, but you'll be told to move from one office to the other up until the last person switches off the phone for you, or they tell you to call next week, of which it will be too late. This is the 21st century has brought with it fast flowing information. You cannot keep a story for 2 weeks. Someone else would have broken it by that time. An example could be a story which we had been working on, where we wanted to know the types of test kits allowed in Zimbabwe and those condemned. We were told to move from office to office and to accept and absorb every lie from different government departments, up until we realized that there's nothing like that. We don't have a list. So they do not want with that information. And the COVID period has given them an extra reason not to give you, because they will simply say it's a matter of state security. Now we are not even allowed to write that someone has died of COVID, because you'll be said you are causing alarm and despondency. You'll be arrested. Recently we saw the Criminal Codification Reform Act, part of it being revived, or attempts to revive it. That is a very dangerous act which was inimical to our enjoyment of media freedom over the past decade. So those are the kind of laws which are being resurrected over the COVID period, so that they silence us as journalists. They've already tried to silence others, but they won't end there. And what they want us to do is to tread carefully. Once we tread carefully, we are no longer critical. We are just now writing stories from press statements. That is what they want. They don't want you to question how much they've used. They don't want you to question how much they are going to use, what they are going to buy, who is going to buy them on behalf of government. That should not be your worry. That is what they want. That is what they want. What they want is for you to write 10 million Zimbabweans will get a vaccine. The company which is going to buy it, they don't want you to ask. How much will be used? They don't want you to ask. Those kind of things.
There are a lot of things that's happening during this pandemic. A lot of corruption cases going on, and they don't want those things to be investigated. They don't want people to be brave to dive into those issues and expose some of their close acquaintances or themselves. They are using the lockdown to curtail the rights of every citizen, to curtail the rights of activists, everyone who they think has a dissenting voice. They want to use this COVID-19 to silence them. Because if you are arrested today and we have a lockdown, and with the statutory instruments that they release, they say only urgent matters are brought to the courts. It means if your bail is denied and you don't have money, you are going to rot in jail until the lockdown is lifted, or until the time they think it's now okay for them to continue with the court processes. So I think they are using the lockdown to curtail the rights of every citizen.
You cross lines, you cross people, and it's not safe for you. And you don't have much protection other than you being a journalist with journalist friends who are likely to write about you if you get arrested or if you disappear. So I don't know, maybe we will continue, but it's not safe. It's continuing with risks in mind.
Those citizen journalists out on the streets are frontline workers. And I think they've been doing an amazing job. They're working under really crazy conditions under this lockdown, but it's a lot of the citizen journalists out there who've been covering what's going on, and many, I think, have also been innovating about how can we present news in a different way under lockdown. So I think there's been a lot of interesting emergence of new formats under lockdown. So I think Zimbabwean content creators trying out new formats of news, using Zoom for interviews and so forth. So I think no matter what, you've seen alternative information still managing to get out to the general public because your digital media startups, your online platforms, your community media initiatives are using new innovative formats to try and get that information out there. If it's a Zoom interview, if it's a WhatsApp group discussion, I think those formats are being tried out and have been successful in a lot of ways. So I think what's been interesting with the COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdowns that we've had, from 2020 coming through to 2021, I think one thing that we've seen, of course, it's affected mainstream media, so your legacy media, be it your Newsday, Daily News, Herald, and so forth. Because of the lockdowns, they're not able to be out there selling their newspapers on the streets, and so you started receiving PDFs of the newspapers. But I think it definitely affected legacy media, decreased their circulation. Unfortunately, I think even you've seen more examples of elements of even private media being captured because their sustainability got so affected by the lockdown. And so I think that's why why the digital media space is the most important space in Zimbabwe at the moment, because it's the freest, most independent, most alternative space. And that's the space of digital media startups, your online platforms, your community media voices. That's very much why Content Creators Network came to being, is to help incubate that new generation of digital media startups and online platforms, and to really be able to challenge the status quo and support free expression.